Sports Radio 95.9 The Fan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Nach On Sports Podcast. I am your host, Anthony Nachreiner. Today on the podcast, we're talking my favorite subject, Tampa Bay Buccaneers football. Joining me on the Nach On Sports Podcast to discuss Bucs football is Christopher Fisher, better known as Fish, from the Bucs Brief podcast. You can check them out at bucsbrief.com and on Twitter at Bucs Brief for the latest on all things Bucs football. So let's get him on. Fish, how you doing today, man?
Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm good. Not really happy with yesterday's performance, but, what can I say about that? I'm sure you're kind of feeling the same way.
I am, yeah. Well, after a 2-8 start to the season, you kind of get used to it. It's disappointing, especially with the way that they lost yesterday in a very winnable football game, and it definitely disappointing not getting Lovie Smith that win against Chicago. I really thought the players would step up, but you kind of get used to it as a Bucs fan, unfortunately.
Before we dive into yesterday's performance, like you said, about trying to get Lovie Smith that win in Chicago, how did the Bucs Brief podcast get started, and how did you get involved?
I actually started this, I think in about January, February, and I've been a Bucs fan forever. I had season tickets for 14 years, and really wanted to, I had so many opinions, and you take stuff to Twitter and things, and it's just like, how can I really get my voice out there and become a voice of the Bucs fan community, which is what this podcast tries to do. We try to unite Bucs fans from across the nation. We've got listeners that are international in Denmark and Germany, Australia, and a strong U.S. listener base as well in California and Oregon and North Carolina, just even outside of the Tampa Bay and the local Central Florida community. So it's really cool to be able to interact with Bucs fans from across the nation, really, and that's really what we're all about, kind of being the voice of the fans, talk about specific topics with the team, discuss the games, the upcoming games, and we always like to have guests on from the local reporters who cover the Bucs as well. So it's really been a great time. We've had 31 episodes, I think it is, or maybe 31's tomorrow. You kind of lose track of it, but it's been a great run, and it's been great interacting with Bucs fans from across the nation.
Well, talking about that, if you got the episode tomorrow, can you give us a little bit of a preview of what tomorrow's podcast will hold?
Absolutely. So we do a live show Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock, and folks can go to bucsbrief.com/listen live, and you'll get the Ustream feed directly on that page. There's a chat room there as well, so we get a lot of Bucs fans in there interacting and kind of sending in questions and just chatting as we're going through the show. Usually run about a 60 to 80-minute show, and then it's also available on bucsbrief.com. You can listen to it, download it. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Tomorrow we'll definitely be focused on this game against the Bears. We'll have a guest on from the media as well, talking about this team and really the disappointment. But I'm not going to be too focused on McCown, even though that was he did not play well. But I really want to talk about this offensive line and talk a little bit about the way that this team has not run the ball this year, I think, is going to be my focus for tomorrow.
Let's dive right into that then. You talked about the offensive line. Now, I've been totally on board with the offensive line being terrible this season, and I'm not really sure why, considering the fact if you looked at all the positions that we have, the offensive line with the players, the names that we have, there are a lot of veteran guys. I'm just not seeing it. Is it bad coaching on the Bucs end, or is it bad game planning? What is it that this offensive line just doesn't seem to be getting any holes open for either running back and can't protect either quarterback that we have in there?
Yeah, it's crazy because you think about it, and we always preface with it looks good on paper because you look at some of the names that are on there, and you would think that it would actually be somewhat of a competent offensive line the way they're playing, but they're just not. I think you can point to a lot of things. I think the fact that the offensive line from a draft standpoint has not been addressed through many years. Mark Dominic did not believe in drafting offensive linemen, which is kind of a puzzling thing. But so they've never really developed young offensive linemen. You look at who could arguably be the best offensive lineman on this team is DeMar Dotson, who's been there for years. He was an undrafted guy. I think they were so desperate at the beginning of the year, noting how bad that this offensive line was going to be, that they went out and traded Tim Wright for Logan Mankins, who has not been great. I mean, he's been average. He's definitely not playing at that all-pro level that he played for in New England. And Anthony Collins has struggled in pass protection. The inside is not Patrick Omame, who could have been his worst game. I've seen him play yesterday. Just was eaten alive. They're not gelling as a unit. I haven't watched the The coach's film doesn't come out until tomorrow evening, so I'm trying to see if they're actually still running his own blocking scheme, which they definitely have struggled with this year. But they are not even attempting to run the football, and you're not going to win football games if you're not even attempting to run the ball. They rank now second to last in rushing attempts per game, and the only team who runs the ball less is the Oakland Raiders. And you look at the 5 bottom teams in the NFL when it comes to rushing attempts is Atlanta, Jacksonville, Tennessee, the Buccaneers, and the Oakland Raiders, and those teams do not win football games. It doesn't matter really at this point what running back you put in there because the holes are just not developing.
We're joined here with Feej from @Bucs Brief. You can follow him on Twitter @Bucs Brief and BucsBrief.com. Just talking about the Chicago Bear game from yesterday. Talking about the offensive line. Now, let me ask you this: which offensive lineman do you put has probably had the worst season? I feel like Anthony Collins has not lived up to the contract that he got signed to. And yes, we traded for Logan Mankins, but I feel like we kind of got duped by Bill Belichick. Who do you feel has kind of been more the culprit of the real underperforming offensive lineman this season?
I think they're all struggling, but I do think Anthony Collins probably has had the worst year out of what was expected from him. I don't think Dietrich Smith has played particularly well at the center position. I believe he had some problems with snaps yesterday when they were in the shotgun. It looked like it was kind of throwing Josh off a little bit. Patrick Omame has really struggled recently. But again, there's really no one else to put in for these guys that are struggling. DeMar Dotson's even had a down year. You look at coming into the season, he was really projected to be the top offensive lineman on this football team, and he's struggled with penalties. He struggled with false starts. Just has not really looked good over the last few weeks. So it's really picking the lesser of all the evils at this point because I don't think there's anyone who's playing considerably well on this offensive line and haven't all year.
When you talk about the offensive line and in the running game and the rushing attempts that we're not even attempting at this point, we know that the offensive line's struggling, but with Doug Martin, Charles Sims, Bobby Rainey, Doug Martin looks to be the odd man out. Do you expect for maybe the Bucs to give him another shot next year just because the offensive line play's been so horrible this season?
It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the offseason. It was kind of I didn't think that Doug was going to get as many carries. Now, he didn't get a ton. He got 11 carries yesterday, but he got a decent amount of snaps coming back off injury. It seems like Bobby Rainey's really been the odd man out over the past couple of weeks. It's clear that they're trying to get Sims more carries, more times in the game, because that's the guy that they drafted, obviously, in the second round. What I don't think makes sense if you look at it from an overall contract standpoint, you're not getting rid of Doug Martin just because of his contract. He'll be coming into the third year, I believe, of his rookie deal. He's not paid that much money, so it's not anything from a financial standpoint. You just got to really see, is he the type of running back that can excel if they stick with his zone blocking scheme, or will he be better playing for another football team? And it's at the point now where with as many holes as you have on this football team, I think it does make sense to try and acquire as many draft picks as you can, and would Doug be an attractive prospect for a team who is looking to unload a pick and maybe pick him up on their team? So that's where I think you have to look at it. Is he going to add anything to your team moving forward? Do you believe in him that he can be the bell cow for your running back core? And are you going to get any draft value for him at this point when he really hasn't looked good this year either?
Talking about acquiring picks, like you just mentioned with Doug Martin, another name that's been out there is Vincent Jackson. Now, I have a hard time understanding why you would trade away Vincent Jackson. I know he has that $10 million cap hit, but he's played well this season, I think, considering the problems that we've had at quarterback. And I think he's still a very, very good wide receiver to help mentor Mike Evans, because as we know, we're seeing a lot of great wide receiver rookie play right now. But next year, you're going to have someone to help Mike Evans out. I just don't see the point. Do you see the Bucs trying to trade away Vincent Jackson?
I don't think it makes logical sense. And I know he's not putting up the production that he's had in his past, and he's making a lot of money. But you're like, he had 9 targets yesterday, caught 5 balls for 117 yards. So he's still being productive, 23 yards a catch yesterday. And if you look at outside of Mike Evans, who else do the Bucs have on this wide receiver core? I know Louis Murphy played a big game yesterday, but he was absent and just kind of invisible for numerous games. So you've got Vincent Jackson, you've got Mike Evans. Unless you're going to go out and sign a bunch of free agents, or you're going to draft some wide receivers this year, there's no one else on this roster. So you've got to, and the fact that they can't run the football, you've got to have some type of weapons at the wide receiver position. If they ship Vincent Jackson, I don't think it makes sense unless you're bringing in a guy immediately to replace him, because the talent's just not there outside of Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans. There's really no one else at this wide receiving core.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, aside from the tight end Austin Seferian-Jenkins, who he flashes moments of brilliance,
Sure.
I just don't know. Like you said, we'll see what happens, obviously, in the coming weeks. Going to the quarterback position, we saw Glennon get benched a couple weeks ago for having a poor game. McCown had a very poor third quarter yesterday. Does Lovey pull McCown at this point, or are we still believing that we still have a shot at the NFC South? I know New Orleans is playing, but do you still believe that Tampa Bay still really has a shot at that South title?
I don't think they have a shot at the title at all. I don't think they have for weeks. They don't deserve to be in the playoffs. They're losing games. We're in the games that they should have won. And again, Josh McCown was brought in by Lovie Smith. I don't think they're going to go back to Mike Glennon. Mike Glennon actually had an opportunity, in my opinion, to win the starting job for the rest of the year, and really got worse week after week. Really looked really bad in that Cleveland game. You kind of look at maybe single-handedly with his turnovers in the red zone cost the Bucs that football game. The way that this offensive line struggles, I know that Josh played a horrible game yesterday. It doesn't make sense with Glennon and his lack of mobility. Josh is getting killed back there. He's getting hit. He's getting beat up. He's sore after each game. Putting a guy who's not very mobile back there, and Mike Glennon, I think you're just asking to get him killed. At least Josh provides a little bit of mobility. We saw a little bit yesterday where he can try and make something happen with his legs when the pass blocking just breaks down. So I don't think they're going to go back to Mike Glennon. I know the folks, it's funny because folks weeks ago said, no, get Glennon out of there. We want to see Josh. And now after this performance, everyone's, we'll put Glennon back in there. So it's kind of back and forth. But that's really the issue you have when you don't have that franchise-level quarterback, and you're kind of just saying, okay, which guy are we going to throw out there this week? But I don't think they're going to go back to Mike Glennon. I really think they're going to try. They feel like their best opportunity to win football games is still with Josh McCown at quarterback.
We're joined here with Chris Fisher, known as Fish, from the Bucs Brief podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Bucs Brief, and check out their podcast on bucsbrief.com/listen live. Let's change to the other side of the ball real quick. They gave up only 204 yards to a very good offense yesterday, or at least with good offensive weapons, I should say. They only gave up 204 yards. The defense seems to be playing better and better each game. Is the cover two finally working out, or what's your thoughts on the success that the defense is having on that end of the ball?
Starting to see some positive traits on the defense. And if you look at it, not only did they only give up 200 yards yesterday, but they did that without arguably maybe their best player on defense in Levante David. So if you look at just the stat line, they held them to 25% third down efficiency, 204 net yards, only gave up 92 yards on the ground. You would think that the Bucs would have won that football game, but they didn't. From a cover two, Tampa 2 type standpoint, whatever folks want to call it, they're not running that exclusively. There are a lot of breakdowns from the earlier games they were actually doing, playing a lot of cover one, playing a lot of man. I still think the scheme works in the NFL, but obviously the key to making that work is developing a pass rush. That's something that's been pretty absent, although we see it starting to get better the last couple games. And really, that's with the emergence of Jacquez Smith, undrafted guy out of Missouri, who, in my opinion, is playing better than any of the defensive ends we currently have on the roster. I still scratch my head when I watch Michael Johnson play. He was given that money. I know there's talk that he's been injured all year, but I'm not seeing that hustle from him that I'm seeing from Jacquez Smith. When the play gets by him, Jacquez Smith's still hustling down the field trying to make a tackle. Mike Johnson kind of seems like he just stands there. If the ankle's bothering so much, when he does actually make a play, I see him jump up in the air and celebrate. So I don't see how the ankle would be bothering that much if he's able to celebrate but not actually able to hustle and try to make a play. So he's been very disappointing. I think the interior has been pretty solid with Gerald McCoy and Clinton McDonald playing well. I was very impressed with the defense yesterday. I think it's going to continue to improve, get better week after week, but there's still some holes that they have that need to be addressed in the offseason, and hopefully that's done through the draft.
No, I agree with you. Great point. Jacquez Smith has done a tremendous job, bringing a spark to that pass rush. The question is do you see Michael Johnson, like an Evan Dietrich Smith or even a Logan Meggins, do you see him on the roster next year, or do you see Lovie Smith trying to stay with him? Because I agree with you. I've not really been impressed with what Johnson's done all season long. And yesterday on the play that Matt Forte ran on the outside for close to a touchdown, he got so far inside that he couldn't even make a play and forced Matt Forte to change direction.
All right.
Do you see Michael Johnson staying on the Bucs roster?
And that play too, he just stood there after that play and just watched him run right by. I had no effort on that play at all, and I watched him for a few plays after that, and it seems to be the same thing time and time again, where he just doesn't seem to be putting in the effort. It's hard from a contract standpoint, and I don't have his contract number sitting in front of me, but I do believe it's a pretty decent sized cap hit if he is let go from this roster. I don't know any team who would actually want to trade for him with that salary and the production that he's putting up. The shocking thing to me is they're still playing him for a large majority of the defensive snaps. He was on the field for 68% of the snaps yesterday, better than Jacquez Smith. So I don't understand what his issue is right now. I don't know if it's what he's being asked to do in the scheme and he's just not doing it well, or it's not fitting his talent level. But he has been, in my opinion, you can look at every single player that was added to this roster in the offseason, he's been the most disappointing to me. He was built up as this, the next Simeon Rice and a guy who's going to be so great playing next to Gerald McCoy and take some of the pressure off of Gerald McCoy. Well, McCoy's getting double-teamed on plays, and you're seeing Michael Johnson go one-on-one with offensive tackles, and I'm not talking about great offensive tackles. We've seen him go against guys like Matt Khalil, who people want out in Minnesota. He goes against undrafted free agents starting like in the Baltimore game. He's just not showing up in the stat line. It's pretty staggering to see and watch how disappointing he's been this year. I just don't think they can move him at this point with the contract and with the money that he's owed.
How do you see the rest of the Bucs season going? They've got some tough tests ahead of them. I know they got the Bengals coming up. They have the Packers as well. They have the Lions. How do you see the rest of the season playing out for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? And
it's kind of hard to predict in the NFL because you look at week to week, this team should definitely beat this team, and then you see the outcome, and you're like, whoa, how did that even happen? So, trying to make a prediction moving forward, I don't see it. It's easy to say I don't see a winnable game on the schedule, but not the way that this team is playing, and not the way the offensive line has continued to struggle. It would be nice to actually get a win in front of the home crowd. They've got Cincinnati coming to town this week, and you've got 2 more home games against the Packers and the New Orleans Saints. So they haven't won a regular season game at home since December of 2013. That was against the Buffalo Bills. They have not won a game at home this season, and that's hard to sell tickets. You got to, hopefully towards the end of the year, they can at least put together some competitive football, because a lot of the games they've played at home this year have just not been competitive at all. That Baltimore game really comes to mind, that I think really left a bad taste in some of the fans' mouth, is having to watch that happen at home. So Detroit has not played fantastic, but that's a road game. The Packers are obviously very tough. The Saints are not a very tough team. They played them well when we went and played them in New Orleans. Maybe we could potentially play spoiler in that game and keep them out of the NFC South championship race. But it's really week to week. It's going to be a tough game this upcoming week. Cincinnati is a good football team, runs the ball really well, so that's going to present a good test for this defense. And you've got some more tough games. I just hope that they can pick up at least one win at home to kind of keep it up and potentially get some fans coming back and sell something a little bit for next year and be able to get a good home base in your stadium.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I've been to Ray J. I went to the Falcons game a couple weeks ago. That was a really tough loss to watch. But the Bucs fans, there were a lot of Bucs fans that are still very loyal, and like I said, I'm sure they're going to be out in full force. But like you said, when the Bucs are good, man, that stadium is just firing on all cylinders, and it's great to watch. And I love that pirate ship when they're firing on all cylinders. But the Bucs fans have next May already circled on their calendar for the draft.
Right.
Where do you see the Bucs going at this point? I've either thought quarterback, but we really, really do need an offensive lineman as well. Do you see Marcus Mariota or maybe the tackle from Texas A&M?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this team can go, and ultimately they need a lot. And I think there's a lot of some part of the fan base is just hoping that they tank the rest of the year to try and secure as high of a draft pick as they possibly can. They currently sit with the 3rd overall draft pick, only behind Oakland and Jacksonville, who just took over actually the number 1 overall spot. They could go in many different directions. I think I've been talking recently about the fact that quarterback just seems like the obvious pick, but just because you pick a quarterback in the top 5 does not necessarily mean that guy is going to win a Super Bowl for you. Doesn't mean that he's going to be a franchise quarterback for you. I did some looking up for the last podcast episode that we did. I just looked at some of the quarterbacks who have been taken in the top 5 since the year 2000. You got guys like Michael Vick, Joey Harrington, David Carr, Carson Palmer, Phillip Rivers, Eli Manning. But then you got the Alex Smith, Vince Young, Jamarcus Russell, Mark Sanchez, Sam Bradford. So just because you take these guys in the top 5, and they're a quarterback does not necessarily mean they're going to be successful. There's a lot more that goes into it. You've got to develop them as a young player. You can't just pick a quarterback and go in the backyard and pick a quarterback off the tree. You're not going to get an Andrew Luck in every single draft. Looking at Mariota, fortunately, because the fact that he's a West Coast guy, I don't get to see a lot of those games. Obviously, Jameis Winston, the guy being in Florida, that's talked about a lot. It's tough for me talking about him, seeing the fact that I'm a University of Florida grad, so I kind of have to naturally have a little bit of bias.
I can see that.
I can't not say that he is a very good quarterback. I don't know if it's going to translate to the next level. I'm actually very concerned about every single quarterback coming out of this draft class. I think it's one of the weakest that I've seen in recent history. I wish that it was addressed in last year's draft. I still think that Bridgewater was out there and available for the Bucs to go out and get. They did not do that. So unfortunately, we're in the same situation that we are year after year as a fan base saying we need that franchise quarterback. Well, the Bucs have tried that in years past too, with Trent Dilfer, with Josh Freeman. Those guys haven't worked out. So it will be interesting to see. There's going to be a lot of pressure, I think, from the fan base to go out and get that top 5 quarterback. Will that be Winston? Will that be Mariota? Or like you said, there's a lot of talented guys on the offensive line as well. There's this kid from left tackle for Notre Dame, Ronnie Stanley, who's actually shooting up the draft boards right now, who would be a good fit at left tackle. So it's going to be interesting to see. Unfortunately, they need a lot. They need offensive linemen. They need edge rushers. I'd pick up another cornerback. They need talent at wide receiver. Still need linebackers, and you still need that quarterback as well. If
you were forced to pick between Winston or Mariota, my biggest problem with Winston is just because what he does on the field is great, but off the field is my biggest concerns. I mean, it changes. You're not in college anymore. You're going to be your time will be a lot more free, and you'll be able to decide what you're doing with your time. Even if he comes to Tampa, which is not exactly what you call a hotbed for sports markets or a place where you can get into some trouble, like a New York or LA or even San Francisco. Where do you see Winston being able to have success off the field, or is he just too much of a risk to take? How do you see Winston playing out if you had him on the board to be able to pick?
I think it's definitely a risk when you look at some of the things that have gone on with him. Now, again, he's never been charged with anything. Been accused a few times of some things, shoplifting, and obviously the serious was the sexual assault, which nothing came of that. There's some things he's done that have definitely become distractions. And you look at what he does on the football field, and he wins football games, and that's really the bottom line. Coming in playing for a coach like Lovie Smith, I think would definitely be a huge positive for him. It's Tampa, like you mentioned. I mean, I don't think there's, you can get in trouble pretty much anywhere, but I don't think there's going to be that huge magnifying glass on him like there would be if he was playing in one of those bigger markets. The bottom line with him, and even though I'm a UF grad, he wins football games, and Florida State has struggled this year at times. They come back every game, and really they come back because Jameis Winston is the leader of that football team, and he brings them back. Now, when you look at just his stats alone, the 19 touchdowns to the 13 interceptions is not as impressive as Mariota's 32 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, but we can't just focus on those 2 stats alone because that would mean that Mike Glennon is a good quarterback, and we know that that's not true. So
very good point.
I don't know when it comes to Lovie Smith, though. And I'm sure they're gonna vet this kid. They're gonna bring him in for interviews, just like they did with a lot of the quarterbacks from last year's draft class. It's a question mark. I think Lovie Smith goes for these high character type players. Over the past years with the Bucs, we've kind of weeded those guys out and got rid of the guys like LeGarrette Blount and Winslow and Jeremy Stevens and guys like that who may not have been great locker room type guys. So it's really going to all come down to the evaluation that they do in that interview process. I'm sure they're going to talk to everyone that's ever been associated with him at the university, and even going back maybe to high school as well, to see the type of character that he is, because you're ultimately taking a huge risk taking a player who's maybe has some controversy with him in the top 5.
We're here with Chris Fisher, also known as Fish for the Bucs Brief podcast. You can check him out on Twitter at Bucs Brief. My final question for you, Fish. Obviously, you're a Gator alum, so the Gators are taking on the Seminoles this weekend. I think the Gators could play the spoiler. I mean, the Gators got nothing to lose. Will Muschamp's going to pull out everything, I'm sure. How do you see this game going? My final question to you, do you see Florida Gators maybe pulling off that upset, considering the fact almost everyone can do it against Florida State?
Yeah, look, I'm biased. I'm not going to deny that, but the streak ends. I mean, the streak ends this weekend. It's setting up perfectly for that. I mean, you look at the last time that the Florida Gators fired a coach mid-season. He went in when they named the field Bobby Bowden Field, I believe, that night. No, it's called Ron Zook Field because Ron Zook was a lame duck coach. He was fired, and they won that football game, and they carried Ron Zook off the field. I do think the same thing is going to happen this weekend. I think that Florida State's offense is going to struggle with the secondary that we have at Florida. I think the pass rush is going to get to Jameis Winston, and I think you're going to see some interesting things from Treon Harris at quarterback this weekend. I think they're really going to utilize his skills. As long as the game plan isn't a head-scratcher like it's been sometimes this season for the Florida Gators, I do think that Will Muschamp will be carried off the football field on the shoulders of his Gator football players a winner this weekend.
All right, well, you heard it here first, folks. Fish is predicting Will Muschamp, a bold prediction that Muschamp will be carried off the field.
That is really bold, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty bold. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would see the players because they love Will Muschamp, but that is a bold prediction. He gets carried off the field and leaves his final game as a Gator head coach as a winner against Florida State. That would be tremendous.
Oh, I'd love it.
All right, awesome. Fish. That would be awesome. Like I said, I'm hoping for that this week because we got to go watch the Gators play this weekend at the Broken Barrel Tavern, and hopefully all the Gators fans that come out, we're going to be cheering them on, and hopefully, like you said, Will Muschamp gets that W. I think they can do it because I think they're going to pull out all the tricks. Fish, I want to thank you again for once again coming on the Nach On Sports podcast. Can you just give a plug one more time of what you guys are going to be covering tomorrow night on your podcast?
Sure, absolutely. BucsBrief.com, go check out. And if you want to listen live, BucsBrief.com/listen live. We start about 9 p.m. Eastern time. I'll have a couple buddies on, and then we'll have someone from someone who covers the Bucs as well. I'm not going to announce that yet because still booking the guests. But tomorrow we're going to break down this Bears game, talk about the upcoming rest of the schedule, and I really want to focus tomorrow on the offensive line, talk about this lack of running game and some things that maybe be changed in the offseason upcoming.
All right, well, you guys heard it here first. Make sure you go check out bucsbrief.com, or you can follow Fish at Bucs Brief on Twitter. Make sure you check them out. And once again, Fish, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, and I hope I can get you on again.
No, Anthony, thanks for having me, man. Anytime you want, just let me know. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Nach On Sports Podcast. I want to thank Christopher Fisher from Bucs Brief coming on and just throwing down some knowledge on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, giving us some insight on the team. I want to thank everyone for taking a listening and visiting the page. You can follow me on Twitter at NachOnSports959. And remember, listen to Mark Moses' show weekday afternoons from 3 to 6 p.m. Guys, I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Guys, hope you have a safe holiday. And remember, if you're going to fry the turkey, fry it outside. Guys, have a great holiday.